So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. So today we will have a set of 3 presenters that are going to show amazing pictures from field, from Australia or from the Red Sea. And so today is the 11th student webinar that will look at the Carbonate system as past, present, and future climate archives. So my name is Arnaud Gallois. I am an assistant professor in the Kocaeli University in Turkey, and I will be sharing this webinar today. Just a reminder as well that this webinar will be recorded as all the 10 webinars that were done before. So if you want to watch or rewatch them, please do not hesitate to go on the Seds Online website or even on the YouTube page and watch and rewatch them, and of course share the word for the future webinar that will be organized. So we organize that every 6 months. So today we will have 3 talks. Each talk will be 10 minutes, and then there will be 5 minutes for questions. So the chat will be closed during the talks, but you will open towards the end of the talk. And then you will be able to type in your questions. So please wait for the end of the presentation to type your questions, and then I will read them to the presenters. And then the presenters will then answer your question. So make sure that you clicked on sending the message to everyone on the chat. And also, if you didn't have time to write your question, or if your question came a bit later than the presentation, please write the name of the presenters for which you want to ask the question, and we will either ask at the end, or we will send the question to the presenter that can answer to you directly after the webinar. And don't forget, when you ask the questions, to state your name and where you're from. So then we can know who is asking the question. So with any further ado, then we can start with the first presenter. That will be Carra Williams. She is a PhD student in the University of Sydney and in Australia. And then Carra, if you can please share your screen.
Yes, sure.
And mute, yeah. So I will mute myself and leave. I will also stop sharing if I remember how to do it. There you go. No. Stop share. There you go. Then you can share your screen and start with your presentation.
Okay. I'll put my laser pen on. Hi, everyone. So thanks for your time today. I'll be presenting my research on carbonate platform and coral reef response to the mid-Pleistocene climate transition on the northwest shelf of Australia. We'll do this using forged stratigraphic modeling. And I've just included a scientific statement here that was sort of the key driver for this research and fits really nicely with the theme of this webinar series. And that's understanding the response of isolated carbonate platforms to major climatic and eustatic sea level and tectonic transitions. Is really crucial for reconstructing past environmental changes and to predict future trends as well. So what is the significance of coral reefs as archives of past sea level, and what is the scientific gap? So coral reefs are these sort of incredible archives of past sea level change. They're also really good proxies for climate change. And in certain instances, they can be really suitable for dating. And this figure here by Woodruff and Webster shows this sea level curve. So this is a eustatic sea level curve from Walbreck, and it uses benthic foraminiferal oxygen 18 isotope records. And in the red dots overlaid on this curve, we can see the coral age data taken from fossil coral reef cores worldwide, and at different ages. So you can see, like, first up, there's this really clear bias. So there's heaps of data for the marine isotope stage 5e. And that's in part because this is the last time that sea level was higher than present. And so it acts as this really good example of how coral reefs and carbonate platforms responded to rising sea levels. But there's also this a clear spatial bias in the sampling to tectonically uplifted regions, and that can really distort sea level reconstructions from coral data. So there's this drive, or this scientific gap for a need for coral reef cores from tectonically stable locations. And so we target the Indo-Pacific quaternary reefs along the Northwest Shelf because that's a tectonically stable margin. And so what's the significance of forward stratigraphic modeling for coral reef science? And we'll just identify another scientific gap with forward modeling. So we use forward modeling in this study to test our existing geological assumptions. We've got some existing core interpretations that we use to calibrate the models. We also have a bunch of subsurface data from different scales, seismic and core data. So forward modeling serves as this really good solution to fill those data gaps, including some seismic data gaps over the reef crest where we can not get some seismic data over there. And we also able to produce this framework with forward modeling to be able to then predict future reef response to changing sea levels and climate. So this figure here is from Pasteur et al. And it's a forward model, or 2D forward model of this really complex reef architecture, and it's based purely on first order geological processes. So in this case, it's using this same sea level curve, eustatic sea level curve that I just showed up to 400,000 years ago. And they argue that these first order geological controls are sufficient to replicate the natural environment. But we identify this as a key gap in our research, and we suggest that there aren't enough models using precise paleo water depth reconstructions, specifically using fossil coral reef cores to calibrate the model. So that's what we've done in this case. So just a quick note on what's the relevance of the mid-Pleistocene transition. What is it? So here is the eustatic sea level curve extending back to throughout the Quaternary 2.5 million years ago. And you can see at the beginning of the Quaternary, there were these like really low amplitude, high frequency sea level oscillations. And then around 1.2 million years ago, they sort of transitioned due to changes in Earth's orbital frequency into these higher amplitude, larger, longer duration, 100,000 year sea level oscillations. But the transition period is quite broad and debated in the literature. But anyway, this transition period triggered a major response to coral reefs and other sedimentation processes worldwide. And this study here by Yamamoto et al. Identified that coral reefs turned on at around 0.8 million years ago, is probably a response to that mid-Pleistocene transition. So in the study, we'd like to know how the reefs on the Northwest Shelf responded to this same transition. So our study region is along the Northwest Shelf of Australia here. It's North and South Scott Reef, and it sits right on the edge of the continental margin. We've selected this site because we have a bunch of really deep, 200-meter deep fossil coral reef cores, and they're uninterrupted, which just means there's been a long period of stable-ish tectonic subsidence, allowing heaps of accommodation space for the reefs to grow and produce these archives for us to capture that response to the mid-Pleistocene transition. And using this data, we'd like to use the forward models to then sort of quantify the controls of the relative controls between sea level and subsidence, the Eustacy, and carbonate production and wave energy in response to the mid-Pleistocene transition. We also want to test the eustatic assumptions for the Browse Basin, taken from the literature, what's already existing out there, and to really understand as well the mechanism for the drowning of this northern margin of the South Reef. So why did this drown? And the remaining reef crest was able to catch up to sea level. And we also incorporate some real wave energy data from AIMS, the Australian Institute of Marine Science. And we use that to explore possible oceanographic drivers of carbonate production during the mid-Pleistocene transition. So with regards to the process, I won't go into details too much, but this was the sort of workflow. We used Petrel Geologic Process Modeling, which is an industry forward modeling software. And we took a data-driven modeling approach by calibrating some really high resolution bathymetric data, some high resolution 3D seismic data, and some existing seismic interpretations from one of our previous papers. And the niche part of this approach was calibrating some core data using coral algal assemblage interpretations. So we produced this really robust sort of chronostratigraphic and lithostratigraphic framework for these 3 reef cores on the north and south reef crest. And then we identified these coral algal assemblages, and that's just basically taking coral assemblage, algal assemblage, and foraminifera assemblage information from the fossil reef cores and identifying 3 different paleo water depths that we used as input for the carbonate production ranges or the limits in the model. So this here in figure 4A is our sort of main best fit 3D simulation output of North and South Scott Reef. And it's well calibrated to the data. It produced a good match to the lithological interpretations. And you can see the final time step here in figure 4C is a pretty good match to the modern environmental setting. We were also able to match the seismic data. We had some seismic facies interpretation, which I won't go into details to, but basically we're happy with the depositional facies patterns through time and through space across the reef. And we fit the models into existing uranium thorium age dates from the cores, which are uncertain, but they provided a framework nevertheless. And so looking at specifically the subsidence results, so we found using our best fit model that the current assumptions about subsidence for the Browse Basin was actually insufficient to reproduce the observed data. So we did a bunch of experiments for subsidence and for the other input data. But what we found was that the best match for subsidence required a pulsed and stepwise increasing subsidence pattern to reproduce the facies patterns in geomorphology. And that actually for the Holocene required a really high subsidence rate up to 0.7 millimeters per annum, which is huge for a passive continental margin in order to drown that leeward reef crest. So we could conclude that this really high subsidence rate was sufficient to add to the recent discussions that the Northwest Shelf is possibly not so passive and more tectonically active than has been recognized in the literature. Or we could also conclude that other factors in the model, other oceanographic factors like storms, tides, and nutrient flux that we weren't able to introduce to the model probably had a huge impact on platform evolution through time. And with regards to the wave experiments, we did 2 sort of main wave experiments. So the first was purely synthetic and using sort of information from the literature. We found that they were really overly smooth depositional facies environments, and we weren't able to actually produce patch reefs within the lagoon. But luckily, we got some real data from AIMS, the Australian Institute of Marine Science, from the WaveWatch 3 database. And we used that, we plugged that into the model, and we were able to produce a lot more realistic facies distributions, including patch reefs, to come up with this best match up here for the wave data. Although we note that in the North Reef, we have this gap still in the reef crest. It's submerged, which doesn't fit to the modern environment. And so with that, we conclude that there's other wave energy dynamics that changed post mid-Pleistocene transition that we weren't able to capture, such as like storm waves coming from the north, tidal flux, and other factors like that. So just to wrap up, what was the response of Scott Reef to the mid-Pleistocene transition? So we found that they were most sensitive to sea level fluctuations and the rates and patterns of subsidence. And we also found that the platform or shallow coral reef facies turned on during every single high stand, with a couple of exceptions, and that was for MIS3 on the southeast reef margin. And that's because it was sufficiently submerged or drowned during the last MIS3 interglacial, so there was enough accommodation space for that high stand reef to grow. And we didn't see anything for MIS7A high stand on the North Reef, and that's probably because subsidence was too slow for accommodation space to allow that reef growth. And this figure here, figure 9, is a conceptual sketch of one of the simulation outputs for the North Reef. And I tried to characterize the response through time. So there's these really clearly stacked saucer shapes of the platform that is intersected by these subaerial exposure events. And you can see this trend from the first phase, which from the beginning of the mid-Pleistocene transition, which is the beginning of the model at 1.2 million years, to 0.7 million years in these dotted lines. We see this really sort of episodic progradational to aggradational accretion phase, and the sequences are a lot thinner. And then after the mid-Pleistocene transition, they grow in thickness, and we have these like thicker sequences between 20 and 50 meters, and a lot more aggradational, with periods of longer platform immersion. And that's basically just a summary of a few of the key results from this model simulation output. And I'll just end with a brief summary statement that these findings really did enhance our understanding of the Scott Reef geological evolution, but it also allowed us to create this geological model framework where we can now go and test some future reef responses to some projected sea level changes based on IPCC projections and things like that. So yeah, I'll leave that there. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, reach out.
Thank you very much, Carra. So if you have any question for Carra, please write them in the chat, and don't forget to choose everyone to send to everyone, so we can read them. So we have already one question from Stephen Locker from the UK. Very nice presentation. Excuse my ignorance, but is there any history of tsunami events on that coast? If so, then where those considered?
That's a good question, and really, honestly, something I haven't considered before. I'm not aware of tsunami events on the northwest shelf around the study region. I don't think we see any tsunami debris in the cores or anything like that. I'm not sure, sorry.
Okay, so while we wait for other questions, do you have any chance to do some field work? Like, is this coral reef exposed anywhere that you could take into account as well in your study?
Yeah, so it's a 4.1 meter tidal range, so a lot of the time the reef crest is emergent, and I know they do heaps of ecological studies out at Scott Reef. AIMS do, the Australian Institute of Marine Science, but they do it on, I think, yeah, on behalf of a lot of industry studies, because it's a prospect for future gas developments, unfortunately. So they're trying to.
Because the field work in this area, that must be nice.
Yeah, it would be nice. It's 500 kilometers offshore or 400 kilometers offshore, so it's a week field trip, I think.
And I also have a question, like, do you plan, because you did this study on the northwestern Australian shelf, but do you have the plan, or do you are thinking to do similar studies somewhere else in another reef, somewhere else in the world, somewhere else in Australia? Or?
Yeah, so the next paper after this modeling is the core, the detailed core interpretation, which is going to draw some comparisons to Ribbon Reef 5 on the Great Barrier Reef. So we're just trying to compare that response to the mid-Pleistocene transition on the northeast and the northwest shelf of Australia.
Okay.
Because they're in similar latitudes and climates.
Okay, thank you. So while we're waiting for more questions, do you know what can be other, broader application of this method or this study? Like, can it be applied to I don't know, to geothermal industry for in other places, or for oil and gas, or for CCS?
Yeah, for sure. I think early on it was initially developed quite a lot for industry to use for oil and gas exploration. And I think now it's being used a lot for CCS, carbon capture and storage, quite successful, I think. So there's heaps of applications with forward modeling.
Okay, yeah. That was my guess, but yeah, just wanted to make sure. Okay, so if there is no further questions, so if you have any question, just to write the name of the presenter, so the Carra, and then we can send the question later. So we will move on to the second presenter then. So Carra, if you can stop sharing, and then Morgan, start sharing your screen and unmute yourself. Yeah. Yeah, go in the presentation mode.
Yeah, can you see everything clearly now?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
So second presenter, Morgan, to talk about which is a PhD student from the University of Miami.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming today and listening to my talk. I am a PhD student at the University of Miami in the Department of Marine Geoscience. My research combines geochemistry and paleoclimatology by using isotopes or as different proxies for looking at past climates, specifically in the Red Sea. So today my talk is titled, Did the Red Sea Survive the Last Glacial Maximum? And this is actually based on my recent publication, very recent. You can see the issue actually just published yesterday. And it's my first author publication called Deep Water Corals Indicate the Red Sea Survived the Last Glacial Low Stand. And this is based on a collaboration with my co-authors that are researchers from all over the world. And so I'm really excited to tell you guys about this work today. So first, I want to go into a little bit of background, give us a refresher on the Red Sea during the last glacial maximum, the LGM. So I'm showing you here just a sea level plot. I have age going back to 20,000 years to put us in the LGM on the x-axis, and then sea level relative to present day in meters. And I just have three sea level plots here, or curves. And this thick one is a global reconstruction. This thinner dotted one is a regional Indian Ocean reconstruction. And then this thicker dotted one is the local Red Sea reconstruction of sea level. And what I want to point out is that all of these sea levels do agree that during the late glacial maximum period, sea level was about 110 to 120 meters lower than it is today. And it really didn't start to rise again until the main deglaciation phase, 16.5 thousand years ago. Now, this is really important and significant in an area like the Red Sea, because the Red Sea's only natural connection to the open ocean is through its southern point through the Bab el-Mandeb, where it connects to the Indian Ocean. And as you can see, this is a very narrow channel. And not only is it narrow, but if we zoom in on it here and see, I've just zoomed in on it and we're seeing some nice multi-beam bathymetry data from PENSA 2024. You can see not only is this area very narrow, but it's very shallow as well, with the shallowest part being about 137 meters deep. So So you can imagine when sea level fell 120 meters, the Red Sea was far more restricted than it is today. However, there is this channel here that goes through, so it never was fully restricted, but researchers do hypothesize that it did fall enough that the Red Sea did just act as a complete isolated basin. And here I just want to show you guys this nice illustration by Sirocco 2003 of kind of what happened to the Red Sea going back to the last glacial maximum. So here we have present day going from the Gulf of Aden or Aden to here's the Bab el Mandeb, the Sil, and then into the Red Sea. Today we have a lot of flux and a lot of seawater inflowing to combat the high evaporation rate. But during the last glacial maximum, you see we have a lot less inflowing water to combat that evaporation. And salinity is actually goes over 50 PSU in the whole basin, and a lot of the other chemical and seawater parameters are also found to have really been out of whack during this period too, causing a severe ecological crisis in the Red Sea, with some researchers even going as far as to say that this might have caused a complete basin sterilization, where all organisms within the Red Sea died. And this is really evidence from planktonic foraminifera. They disappeared from sediment cores throughout the basin during this time. So researchers think if the planktonic foraminifera could not survive these parameters, perhaps all organisms could not survive it. But that's still a bit debated because as you guys might know, might not, the Red Sea is really famed for its unique and very diverse marine ecosystem, and it has plenty of endemic species that really make it seem like it should have thrived longer and taken longer to grow to get to where it is than the last 15,000 years when sea level started rising again. So that's really the goal of my study, is to characterize and investigate how the Red Sea responded to sea level fall. And my hypothesis is actually that the Red Sea was not completely sterilized during the LGM, and that it indeed did thrive for much longer to get to the state that it is today. So for my methods, first I have fieldwork. I was extremely lucky and fortunate to be able to go to the Red Sea for 3 weeks on a research cruise aboard OceanX's research vessel. And this research vessel is equipped with state-of-the-art technology. They have 2 submersibles, CTD and ROV. They even have wet labs and dry labs with full genomic sequencing capabilities. And I mean, they even have, you can see the helipad here, they have a helicopter as well. So I was really able to utilize all these assets, including going in the submersibles. This is me hopping on the the surface of the Red Sea, and this is about 200 meters down. And I was able to use this submersible and the ROV to collect these deep water samples. Here I'm showing you the area in which we collected them. So this is all in the northern Red Sea area. We collected 2 species of corals, and then we also collected water samples at each of these locations as well. This is a closer look at the corals that we collected. So we collected fossil corals called Rhizosmelia valida. They are an endemic species to the Red Sea, and they are a deep water coral that's found between 400 and 700 meters water depth. And they're found in these rock-like mate trees, as you see here. And here I just have a video. A video of the submersible actually collecting them. So you can see here that these are indeed fossilized corals. They are no longer living, but they are found in the same depth range that they are normally found growing in. And this depth range is really important because since they're found at least 400 meters below the surface, it ensures that they were never subaerially exposed, which would have changed their geochemical signature. And you can really tell how many of them there are in this video and how cemented they are in place. So that tells us that there's some marine diagenesis going on. And I just think it's an awesome video. Who doesn't love to see a robot working underwater? So moving on, once we got those coral samples from the bottom of the ocean back to our labs in Miami, we did a whole slew of geochemical analyses, including uranium thorium geochronology, radiogenic strontium, clumped isotopes, and stable oxygen isotopes. So here I'm going to show you guys the results. This is the same sea level curves that I was showing you before with our global, regional, and local sea level curves. And first, I'm going to show you the results of that uranium thorium geochronology. So this is going to tell us when those fossil corals were alive and growing. And you'll see here that we have a bunch that are in the late glacial period, and specifically these 2 are before that main deglaciation phase, meaning that they were growing and alive when the Red Sea was at its most restricted, when it was hypothesized to be completely sterilized. So next, I'm going to show you guys the radiogenic strontium measurements and the results from that. And we analyzed both the water and the corals for this, and we use the water as a modern reference. Really tell us, because currently we know obviously the Red Sea is connected to the Indian Ocean. So we were able to use the radiogenic strontium of today to guide us to what our value should be, because radiogenic strontium mixes really well within the seawater, and it has a really consistent global value that only deviates really when a basin is cut off and another driver can take over. So if it were cut off in the Red Sea, we would expect hydrothermal input or ephemeral rivers with continental runoff to skew these values. So this is our Red Sea seawater. You see it's 0.70915 to 0.709215. And that is consistent with the global value. So before I show you the coral data, I wanted to point out that I made this envelope. So this is where we should see our corals fall if the Red Sea was not restricted. If it was restricted and one of the hydrothermal input or continental runoff would take over, we would expect these older corals to actually fall out of this envelope. But as you see here, our corals, or at least all of our corals, or their error bars, and these error bars are all to the 95% confidence interval, fall within this envelope, really advocating that the Red Sea maintained its connection to the Indian Ocean. And I even did some statistical analyses. I did a t-test and some petite tests of the late glacial corals compared to our Holocene corals, and I found no significant differences between the two. Now I'm showing the temperature data that we derived from the clumped isotopes of these corals. And again, if we thought the Red Sea was restricted, we would expect these older corals to actually be much colder because the Red Sea would be losing that influx of warm Indian Ocean water. But instead, we're seeing a very consistent value. And again, I did statistical analyses and found no difference between these late glacial corals and the Holocene corals. And I do want to point out that clumped isotopes has never been done on this species before for the Rhizosmele, and the vital effects are not known for this. So I don't want to look at the absolute temperature values, but rather the overall trend. And we can see that the trend through time is very consistent. Lastly, I'm showing you here the stable oxygen isotopes. I want to point out that this is a flipped axis. And again, when I did my statistical analyses, we found no difference between these older corals versus our more modern corals. But there is still a little bit of a change. So we did find a 3 per mil difference from these modern corals to the old ones, which correlates to about a 45 per mil salinity. So we are seeing salinity go up in the late glacial, but since these corals are growing, we know that that is not a fatal value. The 45 is also a little bit less salty than other researchers have found too, but this is because we're looking at some deep water corals that aren't as affected by the evaporation of the shallow water as well. So overall, just to recap, we have definitely found corals that were growing during the Red Sea's most restricted period. We found that radiogenic strontium and temperature stayed very consistent. And then we found that the stable oxygen isotopes did show that salinity was changing, but it wasn't drastic enough to kill off the corals. And while these 3 proxies on their own might not be compelling, it really is the evidence of all 3 of them together pointing in the same direction that the Red Sea is much more resilient than previously believed. So conclusions, again, corals were growing during our sea level low stand. Radiogenic strontium and clumped isotopes stayed stable through this time. We did see a 3 per mil shift in salinity, which was not catastrophic for these corals. And I want to point out that we know corals are very sensitive organisms, so it's likely if they were able to withstand the salinity change, that a lot of other organisms were as well. So overall, the Red Sea was not sterilized during the LGM. And with that, I want to say thank you to all my co-authors and everyone that helped me with this project. It was very collaborative and very much a team effort. So I'm very grateful. And with that, I will happily take any questions. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Morgan. It was very interesting presentation. So the chat is open. If you have any questions, please type them and I will read them to Morgan. I have a few questions while we wait for the for the question to pop in. Are you planning to do some more field work? If we can call that field work, by the way.
I would love to. Gladly, I would never say no to that.
I mean, are you happy with the sampling location you chose, or you are planning or would like to sample other areas in the Red Sea?
It would be interesting, but I actually think the location that we chose is the best because the Northern Red Sea would have been probably the most change because it's the furthest from that connection. And since the Red Sea did maintain a little bit of a connection, the Southern Red Sea probably would have had the most stable chemical parameters, where the Northern Red Sea would have been the most skewed. So I actually think finding that these corals are actually growing in the northern Red Sea is the most telling and the most ideal spot to sample. But it would obviously be, I'd love to sample more and see, and also do other proxies as well. We're interested in looking at redox at the time, possibly even looking at like dust and rainfall too, or other options.
Yeah. Then, have you seen any change or changes in the type of corals between before the glaciation and after? Like you say that the corals survive, but do you see any change in the type of coral that you get, or they remain the same, the exact same species?
That's a really good question. I haven't looked into that too much actually. Our species is endemic, so I believe a lot of the corals did persist through, but I would have to double check before I say that positively.
Okay. So we have a question from Stephen Locker, again from the UK. Thanks for some fabulous results. A little off piste, but did you look into the nature of the cements cementing those corals in the video?
So we know that they are just lithifying together, and they're actually forming, like, I can go back to it. Perhaps I can. They are actually forming these like rock-like matrices up here. And then as this like matrix is dissolving, they're falling out and accumulating on the seafloor below. We sampled these ones because that's what our submersible could pick up. And they're falling just directly below. So it's not that we think they're being transported at all or anything like that. That's the, does that answer your question? I'm not sure we know further than that.
But I think the question is, did you look into the cement between these pieces of coral? What is cementing the corals together? Did you look Did you look into
It's
it?
just the clay. I'm not sure exactly, but from working with them in the lab, they do have a lot of clay on them. So we were made sure to really clean them and get all of that off and really just sample pure skeleton when we were going through it.
Because another question I had is, do you see, I guess no, because it's underwater, but do you see any evidence of higher salinity, like deposition of evaporites or evaporite-like crystals associated with the coral?
Yeah, they're actually, I didn't see any, but there is evidence um, of that. Sorry, I don't know too much to go into specifics, but it has been documented in previous papers. I believe Neil Mitchell has a paper where he looks at that too. So we did use that to kind of base off what the salinity should be, and that's why we know ours is a little bit lower compared to other reconstructions. Yeah.
Okay. We have another question from Teresa from Vienna. Hi Morgan, thanks for this great presentation. Did you scan your samples for diagenetic alteration or cements? Do you suspect any influence on your data?
So we did our best to make sure we didn't have any diagenesis going on. Again, I milled away completely the outer end, so they look quite dirty here, but you're able to get a pretty pure white skeleton on the inside. And then we did multiple rounds of cleaning them and passing them through 0.22 micron filters to really make sure that they were pretty clean. And then we did in our uranium thorium analysis tried to correct for then any diagenic alterations on top of that as well. So we're pretty positive that we were able to get rid of all of it.
Okay, cool. So then there is another question that will pile up on what he said from Stephen. Are the currents strong on the seafloor?
I don't know that the currents are actually that well studied on the seafloor. So unfortunately, I don't really know the answer to that, but I don't think significantly, no.
Okay, thank you. So if we don't have any more questions, we can maybe move on to the next and last presenter. Thanks a lot, Morgan. If you can stop sharing, and we'll ask Xianyi to come in.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Sorry, can you see it?
We can see. And if you can hide the
Yeah, my bad. I forgot again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, thanks for having me. And it's basically my pleasure to present some of our recent data. And thanks, Morgan and Carra. Thanks for your setting up the background for me. I don't need to introduce what is carbonates and what is carbonate sediments and why it's important anymore. So today I think we're going to look at this, like, we know the carbonate sediments are really very, very important, as you already showed. We can look at its isotopic data and seismic data and tell us quite a lot of geological information. But today I'm going to ask a question: how reliable are they? Because we know the carbonates, they always get like subaerial exposed, and it's actually quite a big problem for them, and it's how it's gonna influence the loyalty of the sediment, carbonate sediments to record the geological formation. So yeah, carbonates are quite important. They make up like 30% of the sedimentary rocks, and we can extract all of the information like we said before, like oxygen isotopes, carbon isotope, etc., to understand the past. And actually, quite a lot of carbonates they actually situated in a couple of platforms. For example, I've showed a picture on the left-hand side. This is Bahamas, and all the light blue stuff they are basically shallow marine platforms, and quite a lot of carbonates from there. But one problem is like for them they are very like prone to sea level changes. Like on the right-hand side, I've got the picture plots here. Like we can see like with time, like only the reddish time periods, it's actually receiving some sort of the sediments, which means that 95% of the time it's actually above the sea level. It's not recording anything, and it's carbonates. It's gonna dissolve pretty quickly, and erode it pretty quickly. So it's definitely gonna reduce the capability of the sediments to actually record what has been happened in the past. So our aim here is we're trying to use sort of a method to investigate how much it is. If this dissolution and the erosion, which we call it denudation here, it's gonna influence the completeness of the stratigraphy. How much is that? Is that really important? And how is that gonna influence our archives, as we can extract it from the stratigraphy? So here we're gonna use a tool that we recently developed, as we call it Carboketon. This is a forward carbonate modeling model. So which basically means that we give it some inputs like temperature, sea level, initial topography, and it's like a black box, and it render out how the carbonate's gonna grow on the carbonate platform. So for instance, I give an example on the right hand side, and we can see the biggest plots here. This is basically a cross section of the carbonate platform, and for each color, it's basically means one fascist. And we can find like what the fascists look like, and the input sea level curve, etc. And we're trying to insert a feature to try to quantify the denudation, which is dissolution plus erosion, physical erosion together, to try to quantify these processes into the model and test how it's going to influence the stratigraphy configurations. So we have three ways to do it. The first way is we can calculate the chemical dissolution rates of the carbonates. We know when the carbonate's exposed to the surface, it's gonna receive quite a lot of precipitation, and this precipitation gonna dissolve quite a lot of CO2 and become very acidic. So when they try infiltrating down into the sediments, it's gonna gradually attacks the carbonate sediments and to release the materials from solids into the fluids. So what we can do is like we can measure, or we can just like calculate how much calcium in the fluids, and to back calculate how much amount of the rock can be removed. So the first step is based on the temperature, CO2 level, precipitation, etc. We can calculate what's the maximum calcium concentration could be held in the pore water, as we presented here as CaEq, calcium equilibrium. And then based on the kinetical parameters like the reactive surfaces, kinetic reaction rates, etc., we can calculate at which depth this calcium gonna reach the calcium equilibrium concentration. And then we can calculate the profile of the calcium concentration along the depths. And we can integrate this profile and use the equation we showed at the top to calculate how much material could actually be removed from the topmost of the carbonate platform. Sorry, it's a bit simple, but I'm happy to discuss with more details. A second way is physical erosion. So we know not all the rainwater gonna like infiltrate into the sediments. Some of them become superficial runoffs, and they definitely have momentum, and they are able to disintegrate the carbonate sediments and move them around. So we select some river incision equations that's found in a bedrock lithology areas, which has been shown as an equation here. So basically, this erosion rates is related to the erodibility of the lithology, KV, and how big is the runoff. Apparently, if we have bigger runoff, we have higher momentum and gonna move more sediments around, and how steep the slopes is. After we calculate how much sediments can be eroded physically, we're gonna redistribute these amounts to the neighboring lower cells, like on the right hand side, what we shown in this diagram. Redistribute the sediments to the lower cells depending on the slopes. So okay, so the last way is empirical regression. So basically, we've dig out some literature to find out people using chlorine isotopes to track denudation rates in the karst regions. And if we retreat the exposed carbonate platforms as the karst regions, well, they're quite similar, you can actually use their data. So we dig into the literature, we find that the denudation rates of the carbonates actually quite related to the quite closely to the slope, which is the topography, and the precipitation rates. For both of them, it's like the denudation rates we're gonna increase with either slope or the precipitation until they reach sort of like threshold or like plateau, and they're not growing anymore. So we make like a dual variable a regression through these two variables parameters, and we're gonna feed this relationship based on slope and precipitation into the model to quantify how much denudation gonna happen. Here are some basic settings. We're gonna choose a platform top area which is 3 kilometers away from the shore, and we're gonna apply a sinusoid sea level curve. Basically, it's a cosine curve with 5 cycles per million years, and we apply a normal subsidence rate like 20 meters per million years, and some basic parameters I can show here, and if you're interested, I can show it later. Okay, here's some results. I'm gonna show the sediment accumulation curve like that on the right hand side. In the right hand side diagrams, we run the model for 1 million years. So, and we show the sediment accumulation curves for 3 different denudation modes and +1 mode without any kind of denudation. So here we have 4 curves. The topmost curve, the pinkish one, this is a scenario without any kind of denudation. So we can see with time, it's actually thickness is not going down because there's no denudation. And for the yellowish one, this is one with the physical erosion, so surface runoff. And for the green one, this is one with the empirical regression thing. So you can see it goes down a little bit further. And for the lowermost one, this is one with pure dissolution happening. So we calculated the long-term sedimentation rates is around like 20 to 30 meters per million years. I think this is within the range reported by Schlager, 1999 paper reporting geology. So I think it's pretty good. And in terms of completeness of the stratigraphy, we can see that the presence of the denudation could remove actually quite a lot of stratigraphy. For example, for dissolution, it actually removes 1/3 of the sediments has been produced. That's actually quite a lot. We're gonna give example to see like how big actually this influence is. We make a pseudo oxygen isotope curve, which is left hand side of the diagram, like this sinusoid curve, and this corresponds to the sea level curve. So when the oxygen isotope is high, which means it's cold, so the sea level is a little bit low, and when the oxygen isotope is low, it's vice versa basically. We're gonna feed this curve into our model and to see how it's actually gonna preserved in the stratigraphy. And on the right hand side, we can see this is this black curve here. And this diagram shows, like, again, x-axis is oxygen isotope, right axis is the thickness of the stratigraphy. So we can see in the stratigraphy, if we measure the oxygen isotopes, it doesn't look like any sort of like sinusoid curve. It's more like 5 repeated warming events with very abrupt boundaries. And also the variation of the oxygen isotopes is only half of that we actually put in. So this actually makes quite a lot of difference. So if we, for example, if we only look at the stratigraphy, we say, okay, there are 5 different, there are 5 repeated warming events. Oh, there's definitely something going on in the past, but it's actually just a normal sinusoid sea level curve changing, and we are just cheated. We are fraud by the selective preservation of the stratigraphy. Okay, thanks for this is the conclusion. So what we mean is subaerial exposure and its accompanying denudation could significantly decrease the completeness of the carbonate records, and it's going to distort information towards the time period with high but rising relative sea levels. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Xianyi. Very good, very interesting again presentation. So once again, if you have any questions, please type them in the in the chat, and I will read them to Xianyi. While we wait, so are you planning to, because you showed us the model you use and you base that on the dissolution of calcium, but there are sometimes some early diagenesis that happen and we can have some dolomite. So do you plan to model as well for the magnesium similar solution?
Yeah, currently we only consider about pure calcium, but you're perfectly right. There are a lot of magnesium going on. Actually, we have a separate small project. We're trying. We did the diagenesis model before in a separate project that's related to the bigger project. But for now, we are not trying to do it. Yeah, because it's actually quite complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More
Yeah,
complicated than
because you're right. It's like, I mean, the calcium alone already fucks me out. Sorry, already make me quite sad. And I mean, if I add like magnesium and for example in the future we're gonna add like MAO, siliclastic sediments, it's gonna also gonna like make quite a lot of difference. And so for now, I think better to spend more time on validating the model better and find some real cases to test on, and after that, I'm probably gonna if I have more energy, we're gonna test how the magnesium and the dolomitization gonna work. I mean, early low temperature dolomitization gonna work here. Yeah,
Okay.
but that's
So
a
we
good point. Yeah.
keep a close look on your project. We have a question from Dave Cantrell. So interesting talk. Thanks for sharing your results. In looking at subaerial exposures on modern carbonates, we often see not only erosion and denudation, as we all case hardening, surface cementation that would make erosion more difficult.
Yeah.
How did you handle this in your model?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, actually. For the chemical deposition, I think that's not a problem because it's probably only because it's just hardens, but it's still carbonates. I have probably just need to modify the parameters. I mean, density or porosity parameters, and have a look. But you are perfectly right in terms of the physical erosion, and that's why we deliberately choose this equation, because this equation applies in a hard rock. It's catchments, so it's not applies to the loose sediments. I mean, in most sediment transports, riverine sediment transport equations, it applies to the soil erosion or loose sediment transportation. But in this equation, it's calibrated and derived from the hard bedrocks. So I think that's why we choose this, because we know it's gonna harden quite quickly. So we think this is like it could capture the hardening of the carbonate rocks better. But who knows? So we are still trying to we're hopelessly trying to find some cases to try on to test on these equations. And of course, if you have ideas like how to better validate and calibrate these equations, please let me know, and please let us know. Yeah, thanks.
Well, actually, there was one of my other question because you showed us if I understood well, it's based on it's purely theoretical. But do you plan to find a case study being ancient or modern analog and try to replicate what you see to see if your model fits perfectly with the actual world, the real world?
Yeah.
And do you have any idea of what to which? Not yet.
Yeah, actually, this paper published in 2023, they did quite extensive dating work and also a forward modeling work and quite a lot of ground truthing sampling in exposed coral reef terrace in Indonesia. So it's actually have quite a good like edge control. So I think it's and it's also like prone to like subjected to repeated glacial and interglacial cycles. So I think their data is actually very nice to start with because they have relatively good edge control. But we are not quite sure because the carbonate UPB dating, I mean uranium lead dating is it's probably not that precise, but I think with a relatively modern samples, I think the precision is like kind of like acceptable. Sorry. So I think we're probably gonna use their like a modern exposed coral terrace data to try to validate our model. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thanks.
So if we have any more questions, we can conclude that session today. So thanks a lot for everyone to both the presenters and the audience to have been here. And we look forward to see you in 6 months with the next student webinar that we will publish soon the topic and open for call. So thanks a lot.